Good evening, everybody. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager at the Seattle Public Library. And as we begin tonight, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. Here in Seattle, these are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past and present, and we thank them for their stewardship of this land. Welcome to tonight's program with Sandra Cisneros and Manuel Munoz, presented in partnership with Elliott Bay Book Company and La Sala. We're grateful to our author series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation and the Seattle Times, for generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts to the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in our community. I have a couple of quick announcements before we get started. Our friends over at Elliott Bay Books have copies of Sandra and Manuel's books. The store is open for limited browsing, curbside pickup, and delivery, and you can find the books at their website, elliottbaybook.com, and we'll be posting links to their specific books in the chat throughout the course of the evening to make it easy for you. I also wanted to let you know we have closed captioning available tonight. And to access the closed captioning, you just click on the icon at the bottom of your screen. And after tonight's conversation, we'll have time for questions from you. You can ask your question at any time during the program by writing it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Finally, we'd love to hear from you. Toward the end of the program, we'll post a link to a survey in the chat, and we'd appreciate it if you took a few minutes to share your thoughts with us. Now, I'm delighted to welcome Rick Simonson from Elliott Bay Book Company, who will introduce tonight's speakers. Hi, Rick.
Hey, Stesha, thank you. And thank you all who are joining us. The first thing I'll say, and because you just heard Stesha welcoming you, and I'm going to do some my words in English also, but this evening we'll have back and forth as it goes along in Spanish, and for various reasons, and among them that in this occasion where we are delighted to be having Sandra Cisneros here with us in conversation with Manuel Munoz. The occasion is Sandra's newest book, which in English is Martita, I Remember You, but the very same book, look it over, it's Martita, Tu Recuerdo. And it's a book that is in Spanish and English. The Spanish in the book has been translated into Spanish by Liliana Valenzuela. So that there will be some Spanish as this evening goes along, and I would try some, but it won't help things here. In having Sandra Cisneros here, we are so delighted. I believe it was about 30 years ago that Sandra came to Seattle as an author for the first time. That would have been when Woman Hollering Creek was published. She, of course, is known for a book that has become truly an enduring classic. It was actually published by a very small press, Arte Publico, The House on Mango Street, and a book that continues in English and Spanish, other languages. It's been translated in languages and published all over the world, and is still a book. In fact, I think the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, has it as one of its big reads for this coming year. But Sandra has been to Seattle for other books as well, and she's the author of books of stories, novels, and poetry. I know among them are the book Carmelo, Pura Amor, Have You Seen Marie, the Loose Woman. Well, there's two books of poetry that have been published, but the last time she actually was at Elliott Bay was a memorable evening for her book, House of My Own, which was a beautiful book of pieces. And that night we also, I remember, commemorated the memory and work of the late Eduardo Galeano, who was a very important writer for many of us, including Sandra, and that was made that evening even more memorable. Sandra's new book, the one she's here with tonight, Martita, is a story. It's a story of some length, but it's a story that actually has the resonance of a longer work. There's correspondence that's come upon, and it triggers memories of what really are a formative part of the narrator's life, a woman named Corina, who originates from Chicago and is from a Mexican family there, and goes off to Paris as a young woman to find herself as a writer. What she finds are other things, and you'll hear more about that tonight. But the formative parts include memorable friendships and what happened to them, and that again is part of what happens in the book. And so tonight she will read from and talk about this with Manuel Munoz, and also, as I think Stasha said, we can all be anywhere doing this. Sandra is joining us from her home in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, and Manuel Munoz, who's teaching at the University of Arizona in Tucson, is joining us from there. Manuel is also, he's written a novel, What You See in the Dark, 2 collections of stories to date, Zigzagger and The Faith Healer of Olive Avenue, the latter of which was shortlisted for the prestigious Frank O'Connor Prize. And we'll see what way he materializes in maybe a year's time, when a new book of stories, The Conquerors, comes out. The Consequences, not Conquerors, The Consequences comes out from Grey Wolf Press, a wonderful press. So we'll see. Maybe we'll reconstitute this evening going the other way. Anyway, I could go on, because Sandra's nights have always been memorable, and it's always a pleasure to see her in person, but it will be a great pleasure to see her here this way tonight. And I think Stasha's mentioned everything else I sometimes do about putting questions in the Q&A, and which Manuel will read to Sandra at that point. So for all of us involved in making this happen, from the Seattle Public Library, from Elliott Bay Book Company, the good people at Vintage Books, which are Sandra's publisher for this evening, for this book, we thank you very much for being with us, and now ask you to please join in giving good, enthusiastic virtual attention and applause to the one and only Sandra Cisneros in conversation with Manuel Munoz. Thank you all. Gracias.
Thank you, Rick. I'm going to let Manuel start, but I just first want to say thank you to Elliott Bay. I have such good memories of visiting your bookstore, and the Seattle Public Library, because I'm a product, and I think Manuel is also a product of the public library.
You're absolutely,
Manuel.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm glad that we share the willingness to take that very first step, the first words out of our mouths. Gracias. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us tonight, but also again to the Seattle Public Library and Elliott Bay Book Company for sponsoring the gathering, and for the encouragement for us to every once in a while speak in Spanish, ¿verdad? It is, after all, when we're thinking about your book, that it is a dual edition. You already see that I have lovely marks where I've been reading and thinking about it. Martita Te Recuerdo on the other side, translated by the poet and the translator Liliana Valenzuela. But Sandra, it's such a pleasure to be able to, it's an honor to be able to speak with you about it. You've had such an illustrious run for the past couple of days, speaking to Jorge Ramos, the book critic Donna Seaman, Dorothy Allison.
Christiana Amanpour, but she had some pressing world event she had to go off to, so they gave me to someone else. And I was kind of relieved, because I think I would be too nervous to talk to Christiana Amanpour.
Well, one day we can hope. I mean, for those of you who have missed it, I think I saw some pictures on Instagram of a Times Square billboard, which I thought was reserved.
Was it 33rd and 7th Avenue?
Well, it's New York. That's all I know. And when it's that big and that illustrious, I always thought that was reserved for superheroes. But you are a hero, Sandra. So.
Oh yeah. Oh, I can't believe it. If I keep living long enough, I will each year will keep astonishing me. So I have to live long so that I can get all these amazing things that keep happening that I never would have expected. But I have to thank my 2 agents, Susan Bergholz and Stuart Bernstein, who make wonderful and amazing things happen. And
Herald Square it is, down on 34th. There we go.
Thank you.
But still New York. But In all cases, it's wonderful. And I love the word that they use to highlight celebramos. We're celebrating the publication of this book. Martita, I Remember You. It is a story that that opens in Chicago. This is your main character, Corina Bufina. You'll tell us a little bit about why she's named Bufina in this book. Encounters a letter that whisks us away to Paris. And I've got to say, Sandra, you've taken us from, in all of your work, from Chicago to Texas to Mexico, and now Paris. How do the letters in this book get us to Paris?
Well, in real life, there was a real Martita, a real letter that came to me when I was writing my first collection of short stories. And I was trying to write this story when I was too young. It wasn't the right time to write it. And by the time I finished it, Martita became like 10 Martitas in my life. You know how you begin from, you begin from some real emotional seed in your heart, and you remember, and then you start cutting and pasting from other people, and it becomes a work of fiction. So in real life, there was a real letter. I don't know if it's in my archives, because I don't know what's in my archives at Texas State University, San Marcos. Maybe somebody studying my work will tell me they find a real letter from a real Martha. But I'm hoping that this book will help me connect with several of the Martitas that I met along the way and that I've lost touch with. And so this book was really a search for why do people come in our lives so briefly sometimes, but they stay in our hearts forever.
Yeah, and I was thinking, well, I've been looking over this book since it's been in my hands for several weeks. I had the galley, reading it, savoring it, and thinking a lot about friendship and how our ideas of friendship when we're very young are based on, I don't know, maybe a romanticized notion of how we get along with certain people, because Paula and Martita are two very different women, aren't they?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Should we be translating what we're saying? I'm very conscious that we have people in the audience that might not understand what we're saying. So should we be translating?
Sí, well, sí te
Mira, tengo que mencionar, I need to mention que al principio el cuento se llamaba Martita, te recuerdo, porque el personaje de Martita es de Buenos Aires y su primer idioma es español.
Mm-hmm.
Su segunda es francés. So initially this story came to me as Martita, te recuerdo in Spanish, with Martita, who's from Buenos Aires, speaking to me in Spanish. That's her first language. She warbles some French too. So that's how I heard her. And it made perfect sense for me for the book to be in Spanish as well as English because of this.
Mm-hmm.
La Paula, al contrario, es una italiana.
Una italiana.
De conquistar varios idiomas para ser independiente, para no tener que volver a dormir en el sofá, en la sala de su tío donde ella vivía, y empezando su carrera como una mujer independiente. Paula's this woman who just wants a job so she doesn't have to go back and sleep on her uncle's couch outside of Milano in a little muddy town. So these women want different things, but they're based on real people that I met, sometimes over a weekend, sometimes over a season, sometimes over a few days. And I just felt like they rescued me during a time, Manuel. I know this happens to you too. Sometimes when you're lost and you're traveling or you're homeless or hungry, and the people who have nothing are the ones that give you shelter. Y creo que también me impactó porque me di cuenta durante esta estancia que estuve viviendo en París de la vida de mi padre, porque soy hija de inmigrante, y que mi papá quizás tuvo unas amistades similares con gente que le ayudaron cuando él llegó a los Estados Unidos. So I had this feeling when I was writing this and when I was living it, my father, who came to the United States during World War II, that he also had stories like this where, someone would pickpocket, would steal all his savings, and he was stuck in New Orleans with no money, or he would be in Dallas and not know anyone, and strangers would take him in. So it reminded me of my father's story. It made me very sensitive to the situation of immigrants now.
Ujú. Y pues mi mamá es de Texas y de vez en cuando, y de México, del lado de mi padre también. Y de vez en cuando se recuerda de una amiga o ya no me acuerdo el nombre, pero sí me recuerdo de la manera de ser. So my mother's from Texas. She's in a Mexican side also on my dad's side. And every once in a while, she will come up with a story of remembrance. She can't remember the name, but she'll remember the way, someone's way of being, someone's way of
Someone's
being in the world.
kindness,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that
Mhm.
nice? We don't just remember rencores, bad things, but we remember people's kindnesses that shines through decades. It's a beautiful way to remember someone, even if you can't remember their last name.
Ya, ya. Y especialmente si uno puede tener las memorias en una carta, to have the remember.
No tenemos esa costumbre.
Ya no tenemos eso. We don't have that custom anymore, or that practice anymore of
Yeah.
sending letters to one another. But I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about what it means to have a letter in your possession. ¿Qué te parece tener una carta como un recuerdo en
Well, especially now
nuestras
I
manos?
live in Mexico, and I tell people, don't mail them to me, mail them to my assistant in the United States, because it takes months and months for letters to get here. But when I do get them, they're always like staggered, like a couple months later, because I haven't been able to go back to the United States because of COVID. And when you get them, how wonderful to have something in your hands, something that you can reread. And I usually try to maybe write a letter back. Ahora que vivo en México, le digo a todo el mundo, favor de no mandarme cartas a México desde los Estados Unidos, porque quién sabe dónde se pierdan o si se van a llegar, pero muchas de mis cartas llegan a mi asistente que vive en Austin, Texas. Y es muy bonito tener el papel, de tocar algo, de releerlo, de guardarlo, de ponerlo en un libro a veces para marcar tu página y de repente encontrarlo de nuevo y revivirlo, Revivirlo. I think that's the right word I want to use, to relive it when you find it.
Porque sí es otro tiempo o otro pensamiento que uno tiene, que tiene fecha y pasa los años y cambia también, si no la carta, pero uno mismo. So the letter will have.
I think this book is a letter that I never sent, because I began it writing it to a real Martita, and I just felt que me arrancó muchos sentimientos. She pulled many emotions from my heart, and I wanted to bring that into focus. Why did someone I met so long ago stay with me? And I was writing towards that clarity.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like the story itself is a letter that Corina/Pufina, she never mailed. She's thinking it out. And I think a lot of us, we have a lot of letters in our heart that we never mail. Things we said, oh, I should have said, oh, I don't know where they are now.
Pero si uno pone esos pensamientos en una carta, siempre están allí.
O se lo pones entre las portadas de un libro.
Sandra, ¿nos haces el favor?
Maybe I'll find Martita, My hope is that, in Buenos Aires, she's somewhere and she'll read this and say, oh, I knew her, that we'll meet again. That's my imagination.
Sandra, ¿nos haces el favor de leer un poco de español y en inglés también, por favor?
I'll read it in English first, and then I'll read it again, so those people who are learning Spanish will understand what I'm saying. Okay, so this is a trocito, a little piece of this story, and the protagonist is talking about one of those stranger accommodations that she's had when she's living in Paris. She doesn't have any money, so she has to take up the kindness of strangers. And this is what happens one night when she's staying with 2 puppeteers. 6 girls from Barcelona arrive. They traveled all day on the train. They're tired. I told them they could stay, Carlitos says to Jose Antonio. And who knows, one day we might need a place to stay in Barcelona, right? The boys blow up air mattresses, unfold blankets, lay out grids of foam. We are 9 bodies in that little room that stinks of feet and armpits and groin. No, stay. There's no problem, really. You'd do the same for us, right? It's too late to do anything about it. Everyone is exhausted. The 6 women from Barcelona, the boys, the puppets, me. The room whistles like tea kettles. These Españolas are big girls. Because they've fallen asleep first, they stretch and stray beyond their original borders. They sleep the sleep of salamanders in curly S's. In the middle of the night, I dream a gun is being held to my temple, but when I wake, it's only someone's elbow. I can't sleep. It's so crazy. I laugh out loud in the middle of that noisy darkness with only the marionettes dangling above, listening. Okay, now this is Liliana Valenzuela's translation of that same button. Llegan 6 chicas de Barcelona. Viajaron todo el día en tren, están cansadas. Les dije que se podían quedar, le dice Carlitos a José Antonio. Y quién sabe, quizás un día necesitemos un sitio donde quedarnos en Barcelona, ¿no? Los chicos inflan colchones de aire, desdoblan cobijas, tienden cuadrículos de hule espuma. Somos 9 cuerpos en ese cuartito que apesta a pies, a sobacos y a inglés. No, quédense, no hay ningún problema, en serio, ustedes harían lo mismo por nosotros, ¿verdad? Es demasiado tarde como para hacer algo al respecto. Todo el mundo está exhausto. Las 6 chicas de Barcelona, los chicos, las marionetas, yo. El cuarto silba como una tetera hirviendo. Estas españolas son grandotas. Como se quedan dormidas primero, se estiran y traspasan sus límites originales. Duermen el sueño de las salamandras en heces rizadas. A medianoche, sueño que alguien me aprieta una pistola contra la sien. Pero cuando despierto, veo que solo es el codo de alguien. No puedo dormir. Es algo tan loco que me río a carcajadas en medio de esa ruidosa oscuridad, donde solo las marionetas colgadas encima escuchan. Okay, there you go.
Gracias. Gracias. And I hope my mom is listening to this because she would be able to.
Ojalá, ¿no? We hope so.
Yeah.
I also, Manuel, I have to interrupt and say, before I forget, that I did the audio, which is like nothing new. I do the audio books all the time, but this is the first time that I didn't rely on my translator, Liliana, to do the translation audio, the audio and translation. I read it, which cost me a lot of work.
What did you learn, Sandra? Because I mean, I want to say that I speak Spanish, but I never learned it formally. Como muchas personas aquí en los Estados Unidos, aprendimos español, pero no en la escuela, sino en la casa.
We learn mijo and mija Spanish, you know, the things we say to mother and father, but there were a lot of vocabulary that I had to learn. And one of the things I learned in the audio was that me como las sílabas cuando hay plurales. Por ejemplo, hablando ni cuenta nos damos, pero con el audio me estoy comiendo, like I would eat letters. I didn't enunciate when it was plural. They'd say, oh, we have to pick up that one again. I was like, And I had to take a really deep breath and go, like an opera singer. And also, when you speak Spanish, your lips make like a little moño, like a little bow. I think you could tie like a little ribbon around your lips when you're speaking. Hablas el español, tienes que usar mucho como una máquina de coser Like a little
¿Verdad?
time machine, you have to, everything's like here. And then when you speak English, you have to stretch everything out, and make these funny faces. We're not even aware we're doing that, but that's the difference, that after I speak Spanish, it's like, I can't wait to stretch my jaw.
Ya, y todo exagerado cuando uno tiene un micrófono, ¿verdad?
Claro, y además te están revisando y cualquier cosa que haces, si tomas agüita, pues the microphone picks up, your
Everything.
drink of water, the gurgle, the stomach growl, everything. It's fun. It's fun though.
But that's the audio. If I can go back just a little bit, and can you speak a little bit about the translation itself, or anything special, any words or passages that maybe surprised you when the translation work was being done?
You know what surprised me, Manuel? When I'm reading in Spanish and English, rather, I go with the flow of it and get in an emotional state. But when I was reading in Spanish, the same thing was happening. Así que con el inglés siempre me emociona mucho y tengo que leerlo para tener el tono correcto, ¿no? Pero igual el español, eso me sorprendió porque yo no lo escribí en español. Liliana Valenzuela lo tradujo al español, pero me sentí como si el corriente me llevaba. I was like going with the current and just really feeling like if I had to do a pickup, I had to read the paragraph prior to get me in the flow. And I was very surprised that the emotion was carried. But of course, Liliana's a poet. So
Yes.
the sound is there in the sense, really well done.
Pero sí parece como si son dos libros, right?
Espero, porque yo lo oí, como les dije, en la vida real, la verdadera personaje que inspiró a Martita es de Buenos Aires y ella me platicaba en español. So when we wrote this, we had to get Martita, pour her back into her original language, and we put it back in Spanish. The title originally was in Spanish. I just heard it in Spanish because I spend a lot of my time traveling, speaking Spanish. In Italy, that's what could get me by without speaking Italian. And in Sarajevo, when I was living in Sarajevo, I had no idea that former Yugoslavia had this extreme love affair with Mexico. I was popular just being Mexican. Can you imagine that? Like, especially now, like Mexican's a bad word in our time, but not in Yugoslavia, because they love the Mexican music. They love the golden age of Mexican cinema. According to my friend, it's because when they were under communist bloc, they had very few channels. So what they would be able to, I guess, purchase from Mexico was basically what everybody watched, and flooded their media.
Me fascina. Who knew?
I was called Miss Mexico. I have to write about that. I've never told people the stories when I was Miss Mexico.
Sandra, if I can come back to the fact that this was based, on your travels in the 80s,
Yes.
and you were writing this story, if I've gotten this correctly from different accounts, from Woman Hollering Creek, but it didn't make it into that book. But you hung on to it. So for those writers in the room who are listening to you speak about writing and revising and waiting, para los escritores que están aquí escuchando de cómo uno puede tratar de escribir, pero también revisar y también esperar por tanto tiempo con un cuento.
Yeah.
¿Qué consejo nos puede dar tocante de ese
Bueno,
proceso?
primero en español, then I'll go to English.
Yeah.
Primero, cualquier cosa que escribimos no vamos a perder nuestro tiempo, aunque no usamos el cuento, el ensayo, el frase, el párrafo, la página, porque estás practicando. Igual como un futbolista que practica con la pelota y anda corriendo, aunque no es un juego oficial, cada día que practica le va a ayudar para ese momento que necesita echar un gol, ¿no? Así me siento con la escritura, que no, we don't waste time. We don't waste our time. We're always practicing like a football player who's out there kicking the ball, but when he needs that split second to make that goal, he can do it. And I feel like that too about the writing. Sometimes I write things and I put it in a file, and I don't know if it'll go anywhere, but I know that it's keeping me in shape for the next project.
Ujú, ujú. Y también quiero to bring it back to the story a little bit. There are a lot of lines or thoughts about waiting. It isn't just a story about friendship. It is about, as you said, waiting for something to happen, esperando que algo sucediera. Maybe if we can come back into the story and speak a little bit about what that means to be young and to think about wanting something to happen, but then maybe being active and taking control of it.
Was that your life too as a young man? Because I tend to think of that as a gender thing, you know, that women are always taught to wait, that the stories we have are about waiting for someone to come in our lives or an event to happen, something to come and change us. But I don't know how it is for guys.
Well, as a queer man, I mean, the line resonates for me, certainly. Otra cosa necesita que pasar primero
You were
antes que
from a
pueda.
little town, so you needed to get out of there so you wouldn't get killed.
Ujú. Pero ya cuando uno se va a la ciudad y tiene su vida, yeah, you know, once we go away to a big city and we're waiting for, maybe not waiting for things to happen, but the first big thing we have made happen, what happens then? I was fascinated by how the story kept hitting that note. Y suena mucho porque, you know, the story is bookended by an older Corina who's remembering her younger days. And you close with it in a beautiful, beautiful and bittersweet reflection and remembrance, I have to say.
Coming from you, that means a lot. Thank you. Ay, qué bonito, qué bonito.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Manuel, you're writing such a beautiful collection and you're such a wonderful writer. And I think the things that writers hope for when we're just starting out, and we can't imagine that our book is going to be on a jumbotron in New York. Well, maybe some people do, but not this way. I just wanted like blurbs or the good opinion of the writers I respect, my colleagues. So you're giving me that. That's, you know the craft, you know how much time it takes to write one page. Un cumplido de otro escritor es lo máximo, porque ustedes bien, tú como escritor, conoces muy bien el trabajo, las horas de cada párrafo, de cada página, ¿no? Así que intenté escribir lo más bonito que pude, inspirada por muchos escritores que admiro. Creo que cada libro que he escrito ha sido inspirado por otros escritores, como por ejemplo House on Mango Street fue inspirado por Jorge Luis Borges y otros libros. Y luego Caramelo, inspirado por Tres Tristes Tigres de Cabrera Infante y Juan Rulfo en El Rollo de la Llorona. Y más que nada, yo creo que sentí la influencia de Merced Rodorreda y de, no solo Merced, pero específicamente sentí su presencia. I'm always inspired and trying to experiment with forms when I write. And, you know, not exclusively one writer, but I think this book was very much influenced by a writer I admire very much, Merced Rodorreda, who was a Catalan writer, and her great novel is Time of the Doves. So I like reading works by women writers over 60. And I just think they just get better with age. So I'm trying to get better with every book.
Well, Sandra, as the book shows us, you know, it's one thing to have a writer's ear and a writer's eye, but it's important to be a reader too. There's some beautiful passages in here about being recognized for being a reader. And I really wanted to highlight those and to talk a little bit about how it's of equal standing, que es igualmente importante de decir que los poderes que tienen los escritores, pero también los que leen libros que pueden ver y oír la belleza.
Lectores, sí,
Yeah.
porque a veces no nos damos cuenta del poder que tenemos como lectores, o puede ser que la sociedad no reconoce un gran lector. Puede ser que alguien trabaja en una fábrica, o como yo trabajé en una fábrica con fotografías, pero usaba las fotos que íbamos a tirar. Yo escribía notas, líneas de poesía en el parte de atrás, ¿no? So sometimes people have just the everyday work jobs, cashiers or work in a factory, and we dismiss them from the job and don't realize they have these very beautiful and rich interior lives as readers.
Yeah.
And you and I especially know that within our families, within our mentees, within, I know people in my life who wanted to become writers and it didn't become writers, but they're thinkers and beautiful readers as well. They might have a funny Chicago accent that makes people judge them a certain way because they weren't an English major, right? But it made me want to kind of rescue those people in my life that I love that are not valued for being readers.
Yeah, and for having the imagination, el poder de la imaginación. I'm looking at the Q&A bars, and I know that there will be some questions there. Si usted tiene un comentario, una pregunta que le gustaría poner en el Q&A, está abajo de su pantalla. Si lo quiere escribir usted en español, aquí estamos nosotros para leer esa pregunta o ese comentario. And also as well, if you're thinking about a question in English, of course, there is one now, and we're thanks to everyone for attending this evening's conversation, and enjoying Sandra's words about editing and revising and the imagination. Sandra, there's one question here about specifically for fiction writers of color who are just starting out. How do you work through rejection when we're stuck in our own writing?
I'm assuming that sending work out there and it gets rejected, although there are other kinds of rejections in life. I was just saying that to someone today, that despair is part of the process, but not the destination. It's really important to know that that's part of the process of writing, that you're going to get to some place where you're just going to despair. So it's really important to have other friends who are writers, to make those friendships with writers who are at your level or even higher level to help keep you going. Because it's like it's the long marathon. It's not the short sprint. Writing's about this long marathon, and you need people on the sidelines who are spraying water on you or throwing you cookies or
tener el apoyo de amigos, yeah.
Y necesitas tu familia espiritual, because a lot of time our blood family, they don't know how to help us and they hurt us without meaning to. ¿No es cierto?
Oh, sí, yo estoy de acuerdo. Julia nos pregunta aquí, what was the last fiction book you read? El último libro que leíste, Sandra?
Oh, well, I'm reading now. I'm rereading because I like to reread books, several times. So I had mentioned a book called Bone by Fei Mian Eng, a Chinese-American writer writing about San Francisco. And I reread that book just to remind myself why I loved it. And that reminded me of another book I love, The 10,000 Things by the Dutch colonial writer, Maria Hermout. And so I have both of them on my bedside, even though I've read these books before, just revisiting them and enjoying them. But what I should be reading right now is I have to sign 5,000 book plates. I already did 5,000, I have 5,000 more. So what I do is I watch movies of novels I like. And so I watched, like yesterday, 3 different versions of Pride and Prejudice, including the one with Greer Garson and Laurence Olivier, which I recommend, even though
Oh, yeah?
even though they changed the time period from, Regency to Victorian, but it's still good.
Yeah, with Greer Garson and who was it?
Laurence Olivier.
And Laurence Olivier.
Yeah, it's really good. And, I also watched the one I don't like with Keira Knightley, and I watched the BBC one. I can't stand when they make Mr. Darcy look like a borracho. I'm sorry. No, that is not the kind of leading man. I'm sorry.
A ver si encuentro Pride and Prejudice con Greer Garson y Laurence Olivier.
Yeah, it's very good. I recommend it.
Otras preguntas, si ustedes tienen comentarios, aquí tenemos en el Q&A. Aquí hay una. ¿Qué piensan ustedes de appropriation por escritores que han vivido en otro país o que quieren escribir sus experiencias? What are your thoughts, Sandra, on appropriation? Writers who are from one country, one place, who may go to other places to travel and may not have some familiarity with the place. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a very fine line between appropriation and writing about it as someone who's from the outside, which we hope that they would do that. Some writers don't feel they need to do that. But I'm always open to the work of the writing, and does it come from a place of respect and intimacy with the subject? And that I can't make a blanket statement. It really depends on the piece of art itself. I can't make a general statement, but I also, feel like that, like, what if I want to write about, and I do think about writing from a perspective of a male perspective. Am I appropriating? I don't think so. If I write it from the point of view of some life I know intimately, and that can come from interviewing people that are unlike myself or from witnessing. So it really depends on if it's done con respeto and with knowledge.
Yeah, la curiosidad y el respeto de hacer preguntas, ¿verdad? Yeah. Here's a question here about your creative process. Say something about the ways in which you cultivate the craft of writing as a practice in your everyday life. And I suppose that might be one way, maybe, Sandra, to talk about the importance of a really great award that came your way, which was the Ford Foundation's Art of Change. Maybe your craft of writing in terms of your activism or your participation as a literary citizen, we'll say.
Hace unos 3 o 4 años atrás me dieron una beca de la Fundación Ford acerca de mi activismo. Y quiero decir que ese premio me impacta mucho más que cualquier otro premio, incluso los que vinieron de la Casa Blanca, porque siento que toda mi vida, desde que empecé a escribir, intenté ayudar a los demás, intento con mi pluma ayudar a los demás, pero me acuerdo que cuando House salió, tuve mucha bronca con otros escritores chicanos que no veían mi obra como un libro activista. They thought when my book House on Mungo Street came out, my colleagues didn't see House on Mungo Street as a political book. So, when I got the Ford Fellowship, it was like, finally, somebody gave me proof that I've been working all along, from a political perspective. And, I just, like you, we witness too much. We know too much. We can't ignore it. We want to do something because those are our relatives we're writing about and for. las entrevistas que hice durante esa temporada que me dieron la beca todavía están aquí en mi sala, en una mesa, y no he tenido tiempo para acabar ese proyecto. I did do a reading based on that interviews, but I haven't created a project. I think it's theater. I really do think these voices are theater. And actually, I think Martita Te Recuerdo is theater. So maybe I'm moving, I began with voices when I started writing, and maybe I'm moving more to these disembodied voices, and maybe they'll be on the script or stage. I don't know. ¿Quién sabe?
Yeah. Una pregunta de Julia. One of Julia's favorite books is My Wicked, Wicked Ways, very early on in your career. Can you say a little bit about where you were in your life then, in your writing life then?
Yeah, My Wicked, Wicked Wage, which has not been translated into Spanish, is a book that I wrote during graduate school, after graduate school. Actually, it's concurrent with House on Mango Street. So there's some poems that get repeated in the chapters in House on Mango Street. It's not my favorite book. It's a document of my youth. And I think it's not a favorite. Well, I know it's not a favorite because I was haunted by a lot of censors. I could feel my instructors and my relatives and my culture, and my father and my mother all like, nah. And you want to, when you write poetry, to feel liberated and free. And I feel like I had all these ghosts on my shoulders censoring me, and I had to say things slant. So by the time the next book came out, I just said, I'm just not going to publish my poems. I'll keep writing. And that liberated me. And, it made the form looser, it made my tongue looser. So of course the title is Loose Woman. And I feel like the new book of poetry that I just finished a few weeks ago is even less concerned about el que dirán. It's me uncensored.
Well, I've spoken to you several times in person. I've met you a few times, Sandra. And one thing that I have learned is how important it is for you to be named, considered, called a poet.
Yeah.
Qué importante es que uno puede.
Principalmente soy una poeta y más que nada para mí de todos los géneros es lo más difícil es escribir poesía. Poetry is the most difficult of the genres, and it's the basis for all my writing.
Y uno aprende mucho más de leer poesía, ¿verdad?
Claro, y además te alimenta más para mí me alimenta más que cualquier otro género.
Yo digo lo mismo y también, when I was introducing Liliana Valenzuela as a translator of this, I made sure in my mind, poet and translator,
That's what she's so good.
Yeah, precisely. Otras preguntas, también me puedo fijar si hay algo en el chat. Hay unos comentarios allí o no. Pero ya estamos casi
Casi
a
al
las
final.
7, casi al final. Si uno tiene otras preguntas o, como les digo, comentarios, o si no, hay unas palabras tocantes del libro, Sandra, que no hemos mencionado. Pero ahí tenemos más o menos el cuento, sin soltar ningún secreto de lo que pasa en el libro. Pero como había dicho, as I said earlier, it is a story that opens in Chicago with a character married with a child, looking back, and how friendships change, how friendships sustain, and then also how we can hang on to some of those memories and recuerdos. Algo más.
¿Algo más? Pues nada más que me da mucho gusto poder hablar contigo en español, Manuel, porque no lo hemos hecho antes. Yo creo que esta es la primera vez que hacemos una entrevista en que a veces me acuerdo de que la última vez que te vi, me preguntaste de mi palabra favorita en español y me dio tanta risa. You know, I love talking to Manuel because he always asks me things that no one else asks me. And actually, when he introduced me in front of like a big old chingon audience of about 1,000 people, he said, "What's your favorite word in Spanish?" I said, "What?" Never asked me that. Nadie me hace preguntas así. And I just loved it. We had this, you know, because we're writers, we love
Yeah.
language. But
Yeah.
it made me think ever after, like, you know, well, what is my favorite word today in Spanish? What's my favorite word in English? No?
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, when you're not used to doing interviews, I'm not used to doing interviews, having a conversation with a writer de vez en cuando, okay, you know, pero enfrente de mucha gente, I said, I better know what I'm doing.
Yes,
So,
and then this is when you realize that the Spanish you learned from your mother and father isn't enough. When
más o menos, lo
asked
hicimos, sí lo
questions about
hicimos.
politics, I could see myself just hovering like a hawk, trying to find the word in Spanish. I knew it in English, but I didn't know it in Spanish. And I thought, you know, I never talked about those things with my father.
Yeah, pero más o menos, sí lo hicimos.
Moche se nos sale, pero
Mhm.
lo intentamos. That's the
Yeah.
thing. We try.
You
know.
tried.
And
Yeah.
I find that people don't care if it's troche moche as long as you try.
Ajá, y puede incluir a muchísimas personas que pueden estar allí. And before we get to Mara's question, just to go back right again to the favorite word. The reason I asked that question is I read somewhere, I probably Googled it, you say Google, ¿cómo le voy? You know, how do you do an interview? And
Okay, I can tell you my favorite word.
Never ask a question that you don't know the answer to, because I thought I knew your answer. I remember hearing an interview on the radio, and you were having a conversation and you were loving the word wango. Wango, meaning, and that means like sort of when the elastic on your calzones has gotten really loose, we use the word wango. And I could tell that you were taking great delight in how that word sounded. And I said, I think the audience will get a kick out of that. But you forgot. So I had to offer that one for you.
I had a different word for you and I can't even remember what it was, but now I have a new one after this. And you asked me what was difficult and I had to read Martita, te recuerdo en español. La palabra más difícil fue titiriteros, puppeteers.
Titiriteros?
Oh, that's a mouthful, you know, especially in a sentence. Titiriteros. Every time I saw that looming up, I would like, yeah, you have to be very dexterous with your tongue to get around that.
Yeah, I'll be saying that one all night.
Yeah.
Mara nos pregunta, what do you like living most about living in Mexico? Ahora que estás viviendo en México, Sandra, ¿qué te encanta?
Bueno, hay tantas cosas que me encantan y yo creo, pero lo más bonito, lo máximo, lo más bonito de vivir en México, hay muchos mexicanos. The best thing about living in Mexico for me is that there's so many Mexicans. I feel right at home.
Allí merito que estamos. One day, I hope that I get to
Manuel,
visit you.
tu casa, ven, come.
One day, un día.
I'm afraid of traveling to the United States much more than I am thinking. But please, you know, I learned so much living here about myself, about the United States. I think it's where I should be. Will I be here forever? Quién sabe. And I never say never say forever, because my life always surprises me.
A couple more. How do you decide when a piece of writing is done, Sandra?
Wow. Well, and this one took 30 years. So yeah, I started it, put it down, brought it back out. You know what? I had a wonderful editor, Robin Desser, who was my team on the side saying, "Animo, animo." And my friend Dennis Mathis, who has been my fiction mentor all the years since Iowa. And, you know, they helped me because sometimes your work is this close, you can't really see it. And so they helped me. And when they told me, "Oh, you can't make it any better," that sometimes you need the eyes of people you can trust. And they're two of the people that I dedicated this book to, along with my agent, Susan Burkholz. They were all involved in this book in some way in its creation.
Yeah. And, as we're getting to the top of the hour and close to wrapping up our conversation, maybe some last bits of advice, maybe a little homework assignment, un poco de tarea, a writing prompt, an idea, something to think about. For those of us who have journals.
To inspire you. I think it's easy to write about things you remember, but I always tell people, write about the things you wish you could forget. And you may open a genie's bottle there, have some horrible demon come out. So be prepared that you may not be able to extirpate it from your soul with one writing. You might have to go and find a shaman or a therapist or a shaman therapist or friends to help you with these things we wish we could forget. But I believe all my writing comes from some very profound place of memories that I remember fondly and lots of memories that I'm ashamed to talk about. But it's what makes the writing fierce. If you can talk about it and explore it and transform memories from being painful memories of maybe lousy time you had in Paris and transform it into this beautiful story, which I hope I've done with Martita.
Yeah, con poder y con confianza, ¿verdad? Is how we need to approach our work with the words. Bueno, Sandra, que estamos aquí at the top of the hour. We're here at the top of the hour.
Bueno, primero quiero agradecerte porque yo sé que es mucha lata tener que entrevistar. Y más que nada, thank you for going through all the trouble. And I owe you big time for just the joy. I have so much joy talking to you. It's always a pleasure.
Well, today was a teaching day. I was with my students this afternoon. I told them about what I was going to be doing this evening. Platiqué con mis estudiantes lo que iba a hacer hoy. And I was very excited. I was very, very excited. It brings a lot of joy. And even though it is, the time, it is in some ways sometimes the best part of the visit, la despedida, because we're so good at saying goodbye, aren't we, Mexicanos?
Yes, because there's always that idea of volver, volver, volver.
Yeah.
We will return.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we do in my house, as we say goodbye, we walk, the entire family walks out of the house and leads them to their cars and waves to the street. And so the goodbye is as long as possible. Pero Sandra, gracias. También gracias de nuevo.
Gracias al público. Thank you all who came tonight. And just my thanks to the Seattle Public Library and always to Rick Simonson and Elliott Bay Books, who's been supporting me since I was a baby writer. Thank you.
Yeah, gracias Biblioteca Pública de Seattle, gracias, y también la librería Elliott Bay Book Company. Muchísimas gracias.
Adiós, adiós.
Well,
Pasen bonito.
thank you both so much. That was such a wonderful conversation, and the joy is infectious. We could feel it through the screen, so thank you for that. I do want to take a minute to remind folks that Elliott Bay Books, our partner on this program, have copies of both Sandra and Manuel's books, so you can check them out. You can read either of their books or either of the author's multiple books. There we go. And get those at Elliott Bay Book Company. The store is open for limited browsing, curbside pickup and delivery, and you can find the books at their website, or of course, you can give them a call. And we'd love to hear what you thought about tonight's program. So I'm posting a little link in the chat, and we'd appreciate it if you take a minute after the program to copy and paste that into your browser and let us know what you think. We're grateful to everybody who made tonight's program possible. Thank you to our program partners at La Sala and Elliott Bay Book Company, and thank you to our sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library Foundation. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. So now we will say good night. Thank you. And next time we'll see you in Seattle, okay? In town. All right. All right. Good night.
Buenas noches.